What's up guys, it's Coach Cam. Today we're going to be going over this research paper that is about strength increases and rep speed, and which works better to increasing your strength, a faster rep speed or a slower rep speed. So the paper is titled Intentional Slow Concentric Velocity Resistance Exercise and Strength Adaptations, a Meta-Analysis. This was done in 2023 by Hermes and Fry. So this paper, for those who don't know what a meta-analysis is, a meta-analysis is a research document that is compiled of several other research studies to formulate a stronger hypothesis. So what these researchers did was they looked through dozens of research papers, found, I think it was about 24 research papers that met their inclusion criteria for training individuals based on different rep speeds and finding out the increases that they had to their strength. Most people will just read the abstract and just read the conclusion and the results, and then that's what gets put out across social media. However, it's really important to read the actual paper and understand what it's saying. The authors found 24 studies that met their inclusion criteria that were using chronic resistance training over randomized or non-randomized studies, and what they did was they find the effect size. So they find a statistic that tells you how much effect that the independent variable had on the dependent variable. In this case, the independent variable is the change in concentric velocity, and then the dependent variable is their strength. So right into their introduction, I want to go over this paragraph here because it's very important that we understand the author's perspective when it comes to muscle and strength. So in this introduction, they say muscular strength can be defined as the maximal force a muscle or muscle group can generate at a given velocity. So when you read this paragraph, you see that they think, and they are using physics, force equals mass times acceleration. This is partly true and partly false. Let me explain. So your muscles not only can produce force and accelerate resistance across distance, but your muscles can produce force isometrically. So you can produce force without moving the weight. This is important because if you don't consider the isometric force of a muscle, you could be missing out on a component of strength. So as we continue, they cite a study here saying exercises performed at intentionally slow velocity will have a negative impact on force production, which will then limit power output. I agree with that. If you're trying to produce power, which is like moving something rapidly, then yeah, moving it slower, you're not going to move it as rapidly. That's really basic. Let's go ahead and get into the actual studies that they included in their meta-analysis. A total of 625 subjects were included in the analysis. 306 performed fast repetitions or traditional repetitions. 319 performed slow repetitions. Here is a video of me showing you all the studies, what they tested for, how fast or slow they were training, and then what their strength test was. If you look here under the strength test column, every single study used 1 rep max. Now, you might think, well, yeah, Cameron, 1 rep max, that's how you test for strength. However, what these researchers and many people in the exercise science community failed to understand is that 1 rep max is a skill. 1 rep max is not just strength. There's a strength component to it, but there's also a skill component to it. If you are training, if you are practicing weights closer to your 1 rep max, heavier weights, moving them at faster velocities, you will increase the neural gains that you will make within that movement pattern. You will have more practice. More practice can get you better results in terms of 1 rep max improvement. In their results, they found that fast or traditional training was found to increase dynamic strength to a greater extent than slow training. Strength increased by 25.77% for the fast or traditional group and by 22.1% for the slow group. A statistically significant effect size in favor of the fast group was found. I just want to point out here that that's not that big of a difference. 3.5% increase more using fast or traditional speeds. If you are pursuing 1 rep max, I would agree. You want to use heavier loads. You want to move it fast, but that is for 1 rep max. But in their definition, that's strength. However, that is not an accurate representation of strength. Let me explain. So muscular strength is really the force, the amount of force your muscles can produce. How you would want to measure this is with a dynamometer or a force plate. Say we're talking about the biceps muscles. You would want an immovable object where you can place your hands and produce as much force as possible into this object. And it's gonna look like an isometric hold, right? And you're gonna be squeezing as hard as you can to move this object, but it's not gonna move. And they'll have force plates there measuring the force you put out. Now you might say, Cameron, using force plates like this and dynamometers to measure strength, that's so not functional, not practical. Like in the real world, people just lift as heavy as they can, and that's strength. Well, you're correct in that out in the gym, people just perform 1 rep maxes. However, 1 rep maxes also have so many other variables going into them. It's not just the muscles at play. Think of a bench press. It's not just chest, shoulders, and triceps. It's also legs, right? Leg drive, the skill. How often are you benching? How often have you benched? Have you been benching for years? Is this your first time? You know, you can see how there's differences. If you have longer arms, your bench press is probably gonna suck. It's gonna be lower and you're gonna think you're weaker than if you had shorter arms and better leverages for bench press. So 1 rep max has also the neurological skill components. It comes down to your limb lengths, how much practice you have, what kind of practice have you been doing? Is it actually transferable to bench press? You can see all these factors that influence 1 rep max. That's not an accurate measure of strength. It includes strength, but it's also a skill. And I was taught this in my master's program 4 years ago by my professor. He flat out told us and showed us that 1 rep max is a skill. So if you have, it's just like in sports, if you had one group playing basketball, another group playing tennis, another group playing baseball, and you said, we're gonna test for basketball, guess who's gonna perform better at basketball? The group that trained basketball, right? So a lot of times that's what happens in plenty of these research studies. You can see this plotted chart here. This is the effect sizes found from each of the studies. And honestly, they're very similar. Most of the studies are barely leaning toward fast or slow repetitions. And then there's really about 3 or 4 studies there near the top that have seen really high-end results from fast training. So you have to understand that each study is conducted differently. Each repetition is conducted differently. Some repetitions, some studies are having them train to failure, some are not. Some are using heavier loads, some are using lighter loads. So all those variables get kind of glossed over in a big overview meta-analysis type of research paper. So let's go ahead and get down to their practical applications here at the end. They say that improvements in muscular strength are often a desired outcome of resistance training. Resistance training velocity is an easily modifiable variable, and that this analysis demonstrated the substantial influence resistance training velocity has on strength adaptations with faster traditional velocities. This is demonstrated across training status, age, and apparently healthy individuals, untrained, trained, or older, will adapt to strength with faster resistance training velocities. Intentionally slow velocities sacrifice both force and velocity, which would have a negative influence on realized power adaptations. When concentric resistance training velocities exceed 2 seconds or are intentionally slow in nature, strength adaptations are smaller. Resistance training velocity must be considered by coaches and practitioners of strength as a desired outcome because a clear difference in strength adaptation magnitudes was noted comparing fast and slow resistance training velocities. So they're saying that they found a substantial difference, about 3% difference, and that is worth moving faster. So if you're a power lifter, if you're an Olympic lifter, if you have to move fast in the weight room because that is your sport, your weight room, the weight room training is your sport, then yeah, you're gonna have to train those lifts, right? There's powerlifting, bench squat, deadlift, moving fast. Now, it doesn't mean all your lifts have to be fast. But when you do train those, you do want to train them heavier and as fast as you can if your goal is to compete as a 1 rep max. As I said earlier, the 1 rep max idea that is your strength is false, because 1 rep max loads are different than the amount of force your muscles can produce. 1 rep max means you have to actually bring the weight all the way down and move it all the way back up. Like I said, if you have long arms and you're doing bench press, it's going to be way harder to bring that weight all the way down here and press it all the way back up. And your limb lengths, your skill, right? Your leg drive, if you like the lift or not. Maybe you hate squat or hate deadlift or hate bench, you're probably not going to improve very much at it. So this is really just measuring how much they improved at 1 rep max. So really this study should be titled, if you want to improve 1 rep max the most by 3% more, then you need to train as fast as possible. That's really it. Hopefully you understood something, that 1 rep max is not the end all be all of strength. It is a very specific skill that must be practiced and can increase your neurological efficiency in that motor pattern without even having as much muscle hypertrophy improvements. So you have muscle hypertrophy, you have neural gains. When you combine those, you are skilled or proficient at a certain movement or activity. So a power lifter has muscular strength, they have the practice with the bench squat and deadlift. So if a group doesn't practice bench squat and deadlift, then they're not going to have the same amount of increases as somebody who does, vice versa. So hopefully you guys can take away from this study that no, do not just lift fast, because that will increase the peak forces on your joints and on your tendons, on your connective tissue, which leads to wear and tear and injury. So lifting slower, you are increasing your muscular strength, right? Muscular strength is the ability of your muscles to produce force. You will be producing more force and getting stronger when you progressively overload in the gym. So if you do 10 reps with 40 pounds, and then in 2 months you do 12 reps with 45 pounds, and it's the same exact rep speed, you know that you got stronger and you know that you increased your muscular strength. It's not a skill. You're not doing a skill-based movement. You're just following the muscle's physiology and the angle that it produces force in. So if you have a skill, you have to practice that exact skill. That's how you get better at that skill. If you want just muscular strength, then yes, you can train with slower velocities. You're still going to be targeting the muscles. The muscles are still going to be getting bigger, being able to produce more force. All in all, this is the video on this meta-analysis. I'm Coach Cam. You can message me for coaching. Go ahead, like, share, subscribe, and I will be at you guys again soon with more content.